Around a month later, a collection of scaled beings with horns on their heads were walking along the streets of an ordinary-looking small town. There were also some other beings with extremely powerful auras in the town, and all of them had disguised their appearances through various as they visited the shops on the main street in the eastern part of the town. What? 10 tones of wind essence metal. Inside a dimly lit shop, a middle-aged shopkeeper with a short purple horn on his head was staring at the customer before him with an astonished expression. Recently, there had been a sharp spike in the number of large sales being made in his shop, but he was still stunned by such a massive order. The customer standing in front of the shopkeeper was enshrouded within a layer of azure light that completely concealed his appearance, and he said, "Do you not have that much stock? I've heard that the shops on the True Dragon Island are renowned for their ability to supply wind essence metal. Surely this isn't too much to ask. If you had come around half a month earlier, we would have been able to satisfy your order, but at the moment, we only have around 4 tons of stock. All of the rest have been purchased by several other seniors half a month ago," the shopkeeper replied in a respectful manner. It was clear that all of the people making such large orders were powerful beings from outside the True Dragon Island, and he was only a mid-grade being with some True Dragon bloodline in his body, so he naturally didn't dare to display any disrespect toward these esteemed customers. "All right, I'll take the 4 tons you have left then," the customer said after a brief hesitation, then swept a sleeve through the air to release a storage bracelet. The shopkeeper caught the bracelet before quickly examining its contents, then immediately replied, "Please wait for a moment while I get someone to bring the materials to us." Immediately thereafter, he pulled out a disc and spoke briefly into it. A short while later, a small hidden formation in a room behind the shop flashed, and a young dragon emerged. He quickly made his way into the shop, then pulled out 3 identical azure storage bracelets that he handed to the shopkeeper. "Please examine to see if that's the right amount," the shopkeeper said as he offered the storage bracelets to the customer with both hands. "There's no need for that. I trust in the reputation of your race," the customer said as he accepted the 3 storage bracelets, then immediately departed without examining their contents, leaving the 2 dragons to stare at one another in the shop. "I can't believe he didn't even bother to examine such a large quantity of wind essence metal," the young dragon said. "You don't know anything. That man was granted entry to the island, so he must be somehow related to the esteemed true dragons on the island. Besides, a powerful being of his caliber doesn't have to worry about being swindled by a shop like ours. Otherwise, he can report us to the overseers on the island, and we'll be in a world of trouble," the shopkeeper said with a roll of his eyes. An enlightened look appeared on the young dragon's face upon hearing this. Meanwhile, a streak of azure light descended on a mountain outside the small town, then faded to reveal none other than Hanli. He brought out the 3 storage bracelets again and briefly examined their contents, upon which a pleased look appeared on his face, and he flew away toward another direction. 3 months later, a streak of azure light descended into an ordinary-looking valley in a crimson mountain range. At the center of the valley was an open platform, atop which sat 5 men and women in different attire, consisting of a little girl who appeared to only be around 7 or 8 years of age, a green-skinned elderly man, a couple who seemed to be in their 30s, and an imposing man with countless silver patterns etched all over his body. The streak of azure light landed right at the center of the platform, and Hanli appeared before taking a glance at the other people present, then sat down with his legs crossed not far away from the little girl. The others weren't surprised by Hanli's arrival, and all of them continued to sit in silence. A short while later, another streak of 5-colored light shot forth from the distance, then arrived in the air above the valley to reveal a beautiful woman in a colorful dress. The woman descended onto the platform and inspected her surroundings with a cold expression before taking a seat in an unoccupied corner. The green-skinned elderly man rose to his feet upon seeing this, and said, "There are enough people present, let's begin the exchanges. If no one has any objections, then I'll go first." "Go ahead, fellow Daoist, the sequence doesn't matter in exchanges like this." No one had any objections, so the elderly swept a sleeve through the air, and a rectangular stone table that was of a glowing white color emerged at the center of the platform at his behest. Immediately thereafter, he flipped a hand over, and around a dozen treasures appeared on the table amid a flash of spiritual light. Hanli immediately focused his gaze on the treasures to find that several of them were stored in jade and wooden boxes, while the rest were all extremely rare treasures in the spirit realm, and there were a few that he couldn't even recognize. I'm looking for myriad year-een marrow, Xianyuan wood, 9 spirit emerald, and of course, if you have any incomplete profound heavenly treasures, I would be very much interested as well, the elderly man said as he pointed a finger at the wooden and jade boxes, upon which their lids were removed one after another. Everyone else quickly examined the items on the table, but no one was quick to say anything. After waiting for a while, an impatient look appeared on the elderly man's face, and he said, "Is no one interested in the items I've brought out? In that case, I'll stow them away and let the next fellow Daoist present their treasures." "Hold on, fellow Daoist. I have a piece of Xianyuan wood here, take a look and see if it's to your liking," the little girl said in an extremely tender voice, then raised a hand to release a black object. An elated look appeared on the elderly man's face as he drew the item into his own grasp, but after a brief inspection, a hint of disappointment appeared on his face. "This piece of Xianyuan wood is a little small and not quite old enough. What would you like in exchange for it?" the elderly man asked after a brief moment of contemplation. "I would like a high zenith pill in exchange," the little girl replied as she pointed at one of the jade boxes on the table. "All right, a high zenith pills is roughly equivalent in value, so I can agree to that," the elderly man replied without any hesitation. Thus, a golden pill rose up out of the jade box at the little girl's behest before flying into her grasp. She then stowed the pill away and sat back down. After that, the man from the middle-aged couple said, "I'm interested in that jade slip. Would you be willing to exchange it for a vial of contaminating liquid that's similar to myriad year-een marrow?" The elderly man considered this for a moment before nodding in response. After that, a series of exchanges took place, and most of the items on the table were successfully traded. Hanli had also exchanged for a material that was neither metallic nor stone in nature. After ensuring that no one else wanted to make further exchanges, the elderly man stowed away the remaining items on the table with a pleased expression. "Who would like to go next?" someone asked. "If it's all right with everyone else, I'll go next," Hanli said as he rose to his feet with a faint smile. 4 months later, close to 100 golden armored guards were patrolling the area near a giant golden ark above a huge lake. Within a lavish hall on the top floor of the ark, Hanli and a golden-robed elderly man were seated across from one another. Behind the elderly man was none other than Fan Paozi, the man who had invited Hanli to the True Dragon Island in the first place. The golden-robed man had a pair of purple horns that were similar to Fan Paozi's, and he gave off an imposing air of authority. "So you insist on seeing what I have to offer before you decide whether you want to trade your true soul pill?" "That's right, Elder Jean. During these past few months, I've traveled across most of the True Dragon Island and exchanged for many precious materials from other fellow Taoists. However, I haven't seen anything that can compare with a true soul pill. As such, I'm very interested to see what you can offer," Hanli replied in a calm manner. This golden-robed man was none other than Grand Elder Jean of the True Dragon race. Rather than being displeased by this request, Elder Jean merely smiled, and said, "Hee, that's very much understandable. In reality, this true soul pill isn't very useful to our True Dragon race. I'm preparing to give it to an old friend of mine to repay a favor that I owe him. As for what I'm offering in exchange, I'm sure you'll be pleased to see it. Fan Paozi, bring out what I've prepared." A faint smile appeared on Fan Paozi's face as he released a palm-sized red jade box out of his sleeve with a golden talisman adhered to it, covering most of the box. The jade box was sent flying toward Hanli, who drew it into his own grasp before pointing a finger at it, upon which the talisman and lid of the box flew off on their own, revealing 7 scales of different colors, all of which were giving off astonishing spiritual pressure. A hint of surprise appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. "Go ahead and take a closer look, fellow Daoist Han," Fan Paozi said in a nonchalant manner. Han Li was a little suspicious, but he wasn't worried that the 2 true dragons would plot against him, so he drew a light blue scale out of the box and into his grasp. As soon as his fingers came into contact with the scale, his expression changed slightly as if he had sensed something, and he quickly pressed the scale against his own forehead before closing his eyes. Time slowly passed by, and a series of expressions appeared on Han Li's face one after another, including astonishment, awe, and even a hint of fear at the end. Only after a full 15 minutes had passed by did Han Li remove the scale from his forehead and reopen his eyes. "I'm sure you've identified what these scales are by now, fellow Daoist Han. They're completely useless to the average person, but their value is immeasurable for someone aiming to ascend. After all, it's not every day that you get the opportunity to experience someone else's ascension tribulation," Elder Jean said in a calm manner. "That's certainly true, but there should be some differences in the ascension tribulations between true dragons and beings from other races," Han Li said. "There are slight differences, but it's largely similar. Also, no one would be willing to have others in close proximity during their ascension tribulation, so it's almost impossible to witness such a tribulation. This ability to record experiences into scales is an innate ability unique to our true dragon race, and it's not something that can be replicated by anyone else. These scales contain experiences of both successful and failed tribulations, and there are even some from true dragons who perished during their tribulations. I'm sure their importance to you would be no lesser than that of the true soul pill," Elder Jean said with a confident stroke of his own beard. "That may be true, but I'm assuming these are disposable items that can't be replicated. Otherwise, you wouldn't be offering them to me so easily," Han Li said. "Hee, as expected of someone who's slain a true immortal. Indeed, each of these scales can only be used thrice, and after 3 uses, they'll be destroyed. As for replication, I'm the only one in our entire race who knows the replication technique. Otherwise, I certainly wouldn't be offering these scales to you," Elder Jean replied. "If each scale can only be used thrice, then they're a lot less practical, and they won't be enough to exchange for a true soul pill," Han Li said in a calm manner. "In that case, how about I throw in a vial of myriad-year golden mulberry sap as well? This sap is a necessary ingredient to refine several types of legendary pills, and there aren't many vials of this liquid even on the entire True Dragon Island," Elder Jean proposed. "Alright, in that case, I'm willing to go ahead with the exchange," Han Li quickly decided upon hearing this. The true soul pill could drastically enhance the power and stability of his soul, but practically speaking, it wasn't as useful to him as the tribulation experiences recorded within the dragon scales. Furthermore, they could be used multiple times, so they could benefit those close to him as well, making them far more useful than a true soul pill. Of course, he wouldn't have made this decision so easily if it weren't for the fact that he still had 2 true soul pills in his possession. Elder Jean was rather surprised by how quickly Han Li had agreed to the exchange, and he faltered slightly before an elated look appeared on his face. "You're a straightforward man, fellow Daoist Han. No wonder Fan Paozi decided to give you an invitation on just your first meeting. I'm sure you'll benefit immensely during this Dao Fruit Convention." He flipped a hand over as he spoke, summoning a small golden vial that he tossed directly toward Han Li. Han Li caught the vial before removing its lid and inspecting its contents with his spiritual sense, then nodded as he stowed it away. Immediately thereafter, he flipped a hand over to summon a palm-sized wooden box, which flew directly toward Elder Jean. Elder Jean raised a hand to stop the wooden box in its tracks, and the lid was removed on its own to reveal a golden pill. He then took a whiff of the pill, and a pleased look appeared on his face. This is definitely a true soul pill. With this, I'll be able to repay the favor I owe that good friend of mine." After that, Hanli conversed with Elder Jean for a short while longer before taking his leave, and he was accompanied by Fan Posey. "I knew from the first time I met you that you were no ordinary Grand Ascension stage being, but I didn't think you'd forge such a resounding reputation for yourself in such a short time, fellow Daoist Han. Not only did you kill that Stembora queen, you've even slain a true immortal now. It's a pity that I wasn't there for either of those battles," Fan Posey said in a joking manner. "I was only able to accomplish those feats through immense luck and with extensive external assistance. If I had been on my own, there was no way I would have been able to defeat those formidable foes. By the way, I must thank you for inviting me to this Dao Fruit Convention. It looks like I owe you quite a big favor," Hanli said with a faint smile. "Ha, don't mention it. I knew that we would get along well, so I gave you an invitation. Otherwise, there was no way I would have done so," Fan Posey replied in a nonchalant manner. "In any case, attending this convention has benefited me immensely. Even if I don't manage to obtain the Dao fruit, it would have been well worth this trip," Hanli said with a serious expression. "I'm sure you must be quite confident in your ability to obtain a Dao fruit, fellow Daoist Han. Many powerful beings from all realms were invited to attend this convention, but not many can compare with your power. Also, I heard that Tian Feier owes you a favor, and she's one of the convention's overseers, so..." Fan Posey's voice trailed off here as a meaningful look appeared in his eyes. "Ahem, you think far too highly of me, Brother Fan. Like you said, there are many powerful beings attending this convention. I certainly wouldn't dare to say that I'll be able to obtain a Dao fruit for sure. As for Fairy Tian, we've only met on 2 past occasions," Hanli replied in an ambiguous manner. Fan Posey offered no response to this, but he was clearly unconvinced. He then quickly moved on to other topics of conversation that he was interested in, namely Hanli's battles against the Stembora Queen and Ma Liang. There wasn't too much to hide about those battles, so Hanli answered all of Fan Posey's questions. Around an hour later, Fan Posey returned to the Golden Ark alone, while Hanli was already nowhere to be seen. Half a month later, Hanli pressed a white jade slip against his own forehead as he sat in an extremely secluded cave, and one piece of information after another was flashing through his mind. True Lord Fengyu reached the Grand Ascension stage 50,000 years ago, proficient in the 5 mountain profound arts. Tian Kezi reached the Grand Ascension stage 30,000 years ago, specializes in 36 types of poison arts, making him lethal in close proximity. Layman Ban Ruo reached the Grand Ascension stage 60,000 years ago, has attained full mastery of the Azura Vidra physique and once slew 3 Grand Ascension stage devilish cultivators in a single day. 3 months later, the Dao Fruit Convention officially commenced. After a grand opening ceremony, a massive space that was enshrouded under a restriction unique to the true dragon race was opened up, and the battle for the Dao fruits began. Within a dense forest, Hanli was slowly flying along around 3 feet above the ground. All of a sudden, several of the nearby trees transformed into fearsome giants that were several thousand feet tall, and they raised their arms in unison, sending a vast expanse of green lightning crashing down from above. At the same time, countless green fist projections were unleashed, threatening to pulverize this entire space. However, Hanli was unsurprised to see this, and a cold smile appeared on his face as he stomped a foot down onto the ground below. Countless streaks of azure sword chi immediately erupted upward, slicing through the oncoming lightning and fist projections, following which a massive fiend celestial with 3 heads and 6 arms burst out of the forest, then released a halo of golden light with its 6 palms to instantly eradicate the rest of the fist projections. A faint cry of surprise rang out from a giant tree several kilometers away, and the fiend celestial immediately cast its gaze toward that direction before opening its mouth to expel a ball of dark green light, within which contained a small green veil that was several inches tall. Chapter 2445, obtaining the fruit. The vial then abruptly vanished into thin air, and in the next instant, fierce winds were swept up above the forest, while five-colored spirit clouds converged from all directions. A gargantuan vial opening suddenly emerged from the clouds, then released a flurry of countless dark green runes. As soon as these runes surged out of the vial, they exploded into clouds of azure chi, and an enormous burst of law fluctuations instantly descended upon this entire space. A burst of loud rumbling rang out, and the air tremored slightly as countless trees and tons of soil were flung up into the air. In the blink of an eye, a vast region of the forest had been uprooted, and everything that rose up into the air was instantly reduced to powder upon reaching within 10,000 feet of the vial's opening before being instantly drawn in. Everything in a radius of thousands of kilometers was instantly erased before being enshrouded under an azure light barrier, creating a giant black basin that was extremely smooth and completely devoid of life, and it was also rapidly growing deeper. All of a sudden, a ball of white light erupted out of the basin, then transformed into a massive elephant that was over 10,000 feet tall. The elephant was snowy white in color and had a pair of reddish-purple fiery wings on its back, which sent waves of purple flames surging toward Hanli with just a single flap. Hanli's pupils contracted slightly at the sight of the white flying elephant, and he immediately pointed a finger up at the vial opening in the sky while chanting an incantation. Azure light flashed again within the vial, and something shot out in a flash. All of a sudden, the white elephant let loose an anguished cry, and a dark green chain had appeared around its body in a wraith-like manner, binding it tightly in the blink of an eye. The giant elephant flapped its wings frantically as a layer of white light surged all over its body, sending enormous power erupting forth in all directions, but the green chain refused to be shaken off and was only growing tighter and thicker. A thunderous roar rang out as the giant elephant was shattered like a piece of fine china, revealing a middle-aged monk in a white kasaya with a panicked look on his face. He cast his gaze toward the converging green chain, then gritted his teeth before pulling a thin crimson blade out of his sleeve, which he slashed viciously toward the oncoming chain. A burst of crimson light exploded as a strong rank odor wafted through the air, and a scintillating crimson flower bloomed in the sky to envelop the monk's entire body. However, the dark green chain remained completely unscathed and wound itself around the monk's body with ease. At the same time, bursts of green light appeared nearby before converging toward the center, and a series of green tornadoes rose up into the heavens, releasing a burst of incredible force that instantly tore the crimson flower into shreds. Immediately thereafter, the tornadoes transformed into countless azure paper-thin blades that surged toward the monk. All of the blades had dark green spirit patterns all over their surfaces and were giving off faint law fluctuations. The bound monk's face completely paled as he swept his spiritual sense toward these azure blades, and he hurriedly yelled, "Stop! I concede and am willing to offer you my Tao badge." As soon as his voice trailed off, he opened his mouth to release a silver badge. Hanli immediately ceased chanting his incantation before casting an expressionless gaze toward the silver badge. "Only one. Where are the others? If you don't surrender them, I'll have to take them by force." The monk's pupils contracted slightly upon hearing this, and after a brief moment of contemplation, he sighed with a wry smile, "All right, I'll give you all of my Tao badges. Looks like I had no choice but to completely back out of this competition." Immediately thereafter, he opened his mouth again to release 2 more silver badges. Right after those 2 badges were released, spatial fluctuations erupted beneath the monk, and a 5-colored light formation appeared, following which the monk abruptly vanished on the spot, leaving only the 3 silver badges and dark green chain behind. Hanli was completely unsurprised to see this, and the green chain and massive veil opening in the sky both disappeared at his behest. The surrounding green light barrier and 5-colored clouds in the sky also vanished, following which a small green veil slowly descended from the heavens. At the same time, the 3 silver badges also flew toward Hanli on their own. Hanli swept a sleeve through the air to stow the vial and badges away, then departed from this area as a streak of azure light. Moments later, several streaks of light converged from different directions, then inspected the area with their spiritual sense from afar before carefully departing as well. Several days later, Hanli was in his giant golden ape form with 3 heads and 6 arms, and he pulverized a giant insect with a single punch, upon which a silver badge emerged. Hanli opened the mouth of his central head to swallow the badge, then reverted back to his human form before flying away. Half a month later, Hanli was facing off against a yellow-robed elderly man and a red-robed woman above a boundless sea in a triangular formation. In contrast with the grim expressions worn by the other two, Hanli remained completely expressionless. Between them was a golden whale that was over 10,000 feet in length, and its body was riddled with wounds, while its aura was barely detectable, indicating that it was on the brink of death. Judging from the power of this illusionary beast, it must have more than one Dao badge in its body. You two clearly don't intend to back out, so I'll take your Dao badges as well, Hanli said in a bone-chilling voice. Your powers are indeed incredible, but aren't you underestimating Mistress Huarong and myself? Let's see if you can back up your arrogance, the yellow-robed elderly man harumphed coldly. As soon as his voice trailed off, he made a grabbing motion with both hands, summoning a giant black sword and a green pagoda. The black sword immediately conjured up a massive black sandstorm, while the green pagoda swelled to the size of a mountain before layers of dazzling light swept toward Hanli out of its bottom. Meanwhile, the red-robed woman made a hand seal, and bursts of crimson flames erupted out of her body as she transformed into a massive crimson fiery phoenix. The phoenix raised its head and let loose a clear cry, then flapped its wings vigorously and swept toward Hanli as a sea of scorching flames. In response, Hanli raised a hand to summon his 3 extreme mountains, which formed a protective barrier before him, then flipped his other hand over to release the small green veil, which he tossed up into the air while chanting an incantation. A month later, several elders of the true dragon race were standing on a platform in a mysterious space, casting their eyes toward a certain direction. All of a sudden, a streak of azure light shot forth from that direction before quickly arriving above the platform, then descended in front of the elders. Upon landing on the platform, Hanli cast his gaze toward Elder Jean with a faint smile on his face. As expected, you're the first person to have gathered enough badges and arrived at the Dao platform, fellow Daoist Han, Elder Jean chuckled. You're far too kind, Senior Jean. I was very fortunate to have been able to collect these Dao badges so quickly. Please examine the badges to make sure that there are enough, Hanli replied as he swept a sleeve through the air, releasing over 100 silver badges, all of which hovered in mid-air before the group of elders. Elder Jean swept his spiritual sense over the badges before quickly giving a nod of approval. There are 108 badges here, enough for a vast spirit Dao fruit. Elder Feng, bring out a Dao fruit for fellow Daoist Han. A white-robed elder nodded in response before pulling a pristine white jade box out of his sleeve, then removed the lid to reveal a fist-sized reddish-purple fruit. The fruit was as translucent as a crystal, and was giving off an indescribable fragrant aroma. Even just a slight whiff of the fruit from afar struck Hanli with an instant boost in alertness, and he accepted the jade box before appraising the fruit inside with an intense gaze. As expected of the number 1 spirit fruit in all realms, this is truly an extraordinary creation of nature. I'm sure you already know the effects of this fruit, so I won't bore you with an explanation. Unfortunately, this fruit can only be consumed once in a lifetime. Otherwise, there's no way we'd be willing to hold this convention. By the way, prolonged exposure is detrimental to the vast spirit Dao fruit, so please stow it away as soon as possible, Elder Jean cautioned in a friendly manner. Thank you for the advice, Senior Jean, but that won't be necessary, Hanli said with a smile before pulling the fruit out of the box, then consumed it in a few quick mouthfuls. All of the elders looked on with stunned expressions, while Hanli smacked his lips a few times, seemingly eager for more. Only after a long while did Elder Jean return to his senses, and a wry smile appeared on his face as he said, "I didn't think you'd consume the Dao fruit right away, fellow Daoist Han. The safest way to deal with such an extraordinary fruit would naturally be to consume it as soon as possible. Otherwise, it would only attract trouble," Hanli said with a smile. "That's obviously up to you in the end. By the way, the effect of the vast spirit Dao fruit can be extended if you consume a few other types of spirit items along with it," Elder Jean said. 10,000 years of the vast spirit Dao physique should be sufficient for my cultivation. If I can't make a substantial breakthrough during this time, then an extension won't be of much use to me. In any case, your true dragon race has done me a great service, and I'll be sure to repay you in the future. There are a few more people who are almost here, so I'll be taking my leave now." Hanli cupped his fist in a parting salute, then flew away as a streak of azure light, vanishing into the distant sky after just a few flashes. As expected of someone who's slain a true immortal. If he can ascend to the true immortal realm, he'll definitely cause quite a stir there as well, Elder Feng praised. "He'll have to actually be able to ascend first," Elder Jean said with a peculiar look in his eyes. "What do you mean by that?" "With his current power, surely there would be a very good chance of success for him to transcend his ascension cultivation now that he's consumed the vast spirit Dao fruit," a green-robed female elder said. The other elders were also rather befuddled to hear this. Instead of giving a direct reply, Elder Jean stroked his own bear, and asked, "What did you all think of his spiritual sense?" "It's very powerful, perhaps one of the most powerful among all beings participating in this Dao fruit convention," Elder Feng replied. "That's an understatement. If I'm not mistaken, he's only displayed a small portion of the full extent of his spiritual sense," Elder Jean said. "How is that possible? Wouldn't that mean that even our spiritual sense wouldn't be able to compare with his? Could it be that you verified this using that secret technique already?" someone immediately exclaimed. "Of course, I wouldn't make such claims without any basis. The more powerful one's spiritual sense is, the more beneficial it would be for their chances at successful ascension, but his spiritual sense is too powerful, to the extent that it's exceeded the upper limit of what living beings in the lower realms can handle. My innate secret technique tells me that despite his powerful spiritual sense, its foundation is extremely shaky, and if he can't find a way to rectify this, he most likely won't even be able to survive past a few more centuries," Elder Jean explained. "How could this be? I wonder if he's aware of this himself. Even if he isn't, he'll sense this soon enough, but by then, it would most likely already be too late." "That's true. Matters regarding spiritual sense are always the most troublesome to deal with, so we can't really help him. Otherwise, Elder Jean would have revealed this to him earlier." Just as the elders were discussing this revelation, a streak of white light suddenly appeared in the distant sky before arriving near the platform, where it was revealed to be a handsome white-robed young man with a golden crown on his head. He cupped his fist in a salute, and said, "Xianyuan Jia of the Xianyuan race pays his respects to the fellow Taoists of the true dragon race." "Oh. You're a member of the ancient Xianyuan race?" All of the elders were stunned to hear this, and they immediately focused their attention on the young man, quickly forgetting about the topic of conversation surrounding Hanli. A year later, Hanli returned to the Boundless Sea, and after a brief reunion with Nangong Wan and the others, he issued a string of orders to everyone in the Azure Origin Palace before going into seclusion in his secret chamber. This seemed to be an extremely important period of seclusion, and it stretched on for an unbroken period of 200 years. During this time, the human race underwent an astonishing transformation. Several years after Hanli went into seclusion, Fairy Ice Soul returned to the human race as a grand ascension stage being, creating a massive stir among all neighboring races. Immediately thereafter, the Wood Tribe and many other weaker races near the human race willingly pledged subordination to the human race one after another. After that, the nearby races who were on bad terms with the human race abandoned their territory and entered the primordial world, mass migrating to somewhere else on the continent. The human race naturally seized all of this vacant territory. At the same time, many foreign races across the Tianyuan continent were expressing an urge to be on friendly terms with the human race, and there were even some races, like the Flying Spirit race, that declared that they were willing to forge alliances with the human race. Thus, in the short span of less than a century, the human race had been thrust firmly under the limelight. During this period, some cultivation arts and secret techniques of extremely high calibers began to spread within the human race, alongside many treasures that could be found almost nowhere else. As a result, many high-grade human cultivators who were stuck at bottlenecks made breakthroughs in an extremely short period of time, and intense competition had been sparked among the juniors with exceptional aptitude. The demon race didn't undergo anywhere near as drastic a transformation, but it also benefited significantly from the uprising of the human race. The demon race occupied the territory that was neglected by the human race, thereby expanding its territory by around twofold. Some of the new cultivation arts, secret techniques, pills, and treasures that had appeared in the human race also spread to the demon race, benefiting it immensely. If one were to carefully investigate all of this, they would discover that all of these things stemmed from the same place. Everything was originating in the area near the Azure Origin Palace before somehow spreading into other areas and accelerating the growth of the two races by a downright ridiculous extent. Another 200 years passed by, and on this day, a group of devilish guards were patrolling through the air at a low altitude on several black beast-drawn carriages over the original sealed site in the Elder Devil realm. Once the group of patrolling guards were far away, Hanli emerged out of thin air amid a burst of spatial fluctuations. He cast his gaze toward the guards in the distance, then turned his attention deeper into the original sealed site. I didn't think that the spirit refinement technique would be so troublesome that even Mo Guang and Huashuzi are unable to do anything about it. It's a pity I only managed to gather a small portion of that immortal's memories. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to make this trip, Hanli murmured to himself as he vanished into thin air again. A day later, he reappeared in a secluded area within the original sealed site. Not far up ahead was a crimson altar, upon which was placed a black bowl with 8 azure copper pillars around it. As Hanli approached the altar, a male voice rang out from the bowl. "So you came after all, fellow Daoist Han. At this point, I'm sure you no longer have any suspicions about the peril of the spirit refinement technique." Indeed, after spending 200 years in seclusion, Hanli had finally discovered the underlying issues in his spiritual sense, thereby forcing him to venture into the Elder Devil realm again. "Does our agreement still stand, Senior?" Hanli asked. "Of course, I wouldn't go back on my word," the male voice replied without any hesitation. Hanli's expression eased slightly upon hearing this, and he said, "In that case, I agree to your condition. Please tell me the way to cultivate the third stage of the spirit refinement technique." You've made a wise decision, fellow Daoist Han. Only by mastering the third stage will you buy yourself enough time to ascend to the true immortal realm, the male voice said in an elated manner. Immediately thereafter, a streak of white light flew out of the black bowl before reaching Hanli in a flash. This was a palm-sized jade talisman with countless golden and silver runes etched on its surface, as well as specks of 5-colored light flashing around it. This is the talisman that can directly contact the true immortal realm, the way to activate it. Half a day later, a streak of azure light flew out of the lake at the center of the original sealed site, then departed toward a certain direction. Within the azure light, Hanli had his hands clasped behind his back with a contemplative look on his face. 300 years later, Bai Guar was situated in a certain hall in the Azure Origin Palace, delivering a report in a respectful manner to the seated Hanli. At the conclusion of her report, she extended a slight bow before summoning a white storage bracelet that she offered to Hanli with both hands. "Well done, Guar. Not only have you progressed significantly in your cultivation during your journey, you've also tracked down a large quantity of vastine stones, many more than I had expected, Hanlich said with a pleased smile after inspecting the contents of the storage bracelet with his spiritual sense. Chapter 2447. Returning to the human world, I discovered an extremely secluded profound jade mine while traveling through the western region of the Thunder Continent, and at the core of that mine was where I found all of this vastine stone, Baiguer replied in a respectful manner. I see. In any case, if you hadn't cultivated your ice essence body to this level, you most likely wouldn't have been able to sense these vastine stones. You can go for now. I'll be sure to reward you handsomely for this later, Hanlich said with a warm expression. Yes, master, Baiguer extended another obedient salute before departing from the hole. Following her departure, a contemplative look appeared on Hanli's face. He finally had the materials required to refine the vastine glacial soul mountain, and once he did that, he would only have to track down the materials for one more extreme mountain to complete the set. He wasn't concerned about this as he had witnessed Great North Essence light in the Devil Fall Valley of the human world, so he would most likely be able to easily find Great North Essence crystals there. However, at his current cultivation base, there was no way that he would be able to descend into the human world in person. Otherwise, the power of the realm would pose a huge headache to him. As such, he would have to use the star-defying plate and expend a very heavy price to send a fragment of his soul back to the human world. The soul fragment that he had been nurturing in the Origin soul lamp this entire time was finally going to come in useful. At the thought of returning to the human world, places such as the Seven Mysteries sect, Yellow Maple Valley, and Cloudfall sect immediately sprang into his mind. At the same time, he couldn't help but reminisce about his parents, little sister, Li Feiyu, monarch of soul divergence, and other people from that distant period in his life. Several months later, an earth-shattering boom rang out within a secret chamber in the Azure Origin Palace. At the center of the secret chamber was a giant crimson cauldron, within which was a small snowy white mountain with countless silver flames burning around it. As soon as the mountain emerged from the cauldron, it immediately swelled drastically in size, and a series of white runes appeared on its surface as it released a burst of white glacial chi. The vastine glacial soul mountains is finally complete. All that's left now is the Great North Essence Mountain, Hanlich murmured to himself as he sat in a corner of the secret chamber. A year later, there were several menacing-looking men huddled around a fire, roasting a small beast while conversing loudly with one another. They were situated on a secluded path on the border of the Great Gene, and even though their clothes were very much worse for wear, all of them had blood-stained weapons placed beside them. In a corner beside the fire was a frail man who was lying on the ground. This was a blue-robed man who appeared to be only around 21 to 22 years of age, and his face was very pale. His eyes were tightly shut, and his body was bound by a thick rope. There was also a wooden rod that had been sharpened on both ends bound around his mouth, and blood was flowing incessantly from the corners of his lips. It seemed that he was on the brink of death. However, the group of men paid no heed to him and continued to converse with one another in a boisterous manner. After some time, one of the men suddenly said, "That bastard should be dead by now, right? Someone go take a look. Hee, to think that a frail scholar would dare to try and interfere with our business. He must have a death wish. I'll go take a look. He hasn't moved for quite a while now, so he should be just about dead. If not, I'll send him on his way," another man said with a cold expression as he picked up his weapon. "Suit yourself, but make it quick, we have to leave this area tomorrow." The entire world is in turmoil at the moment. It's not going to be easy to make a living, the first man said in a nonchalant manner. A cold smile appeared on the second man's face, and he made his way over to the blue-robed man with weapon in hand before giving him a vicious kick. The blue-robed man was sent flying for several feet before landing on his back, but he remained completely still, and the blood on the corners of his lips was beginning to congeal. "He's dead." Tui, lucky bastard, you've saved yourself some torture, that's for sure. The second man spat onto the ground before turning to return to the fire. Right at this moment, a gust of grey wind swept forth, and a burst of sinister cackling rang out. Fantastic! I didn't think I would encounter such exceptional prey in such a secluded area. Once I suck away your souls, that treasure of mine will finally be successfully refined. It's that demonic cultivator who's been wreaking havoc in the area. Run! One of the men exclaimed as his expression changed drastically, and he didn't even dare to make a grab for his weapon before fleeing the scene. Everyone else also scattered and ran for their lives in a horrified manner as well. Thus, the blue-robed man was the only one left beside the fire. The cackling continued, and all of a sudden, several bursts of black chi shot forth in different directions. Moments later, a string of blood-curdling cries rang out in succession from those directions. The cackling then abruptly ceased, and all of the black chi converged above the fire before transforming into a black-robed Taoist priest. The Taoist priest had a pair of small eyes that gave off a sinister appearance, and he was holding a grey crystal ball with an elated expression. The souls of those people contain a vast amount of baleful chi. They must have killed many people during their lifetimes. These souls are exceptional for refining this treasure. Oh. There's someone else there whose soul hasn't scattered yet, I'll go ahead and take it as well. A hint of surprise appeared on the Taoist priest's face as he spotted the blue-robed man on the ground, and he released a burst of black chi from the crystal ball that swept directly toward the blue-robed man. Boom! In the instant that the black chi came into contact with the blue-robed man, it abruptly exploded, sweeping up powerful shockwaves that forced the Taoist priest to rush back and retreat. Who's there? Come out right now! The Taoist priest exclaimed in an alarmed manner, then immediately released several talismans to form several light barriers around himself while inspecting his surroundings with a wary expression. Judging from your aura, it looks like you're using a devil Dao cultivation art of the lowest caliber. A male voice suddenly rang out nearby. Who's there? The Taoist priest hurriedly cast his gaze toward the direction that the voice had come from, only to be completely stunned by what he saw. The blue-robed man had sat up with an indifferent expression, and the rope around his body and wooden stick in his mouth had both disappeared. Who are you? Did you come here for me? The Taoist priest asked in a wary manner as countless thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. Did I come here for you? Hee, you think far too highly of yourself. No one in this entire human world is important enough to deserve a visit from me, the blue-robed man said as a hint of mockery appeared on his face. Human world. Could it be that you're? I don't have time to waste speaking with a junior like you. The blue-robed man abruptly cut off the Taoist priest with a cold look in his eyes, then opened his mouth to release an azure thread. The light barriers around the Taoist priest's body were instantly destroyed, and a hole that was around as thick as a finger was blown through his glabella, upon which he collapsed to the ground before he could even make a single sound. The blue-robed man waved a hand to draw the body of the Taoist priest over to him before he laid a hand on the Taoist priest's head. Blue light flashed within his eyes as a translucent thread shot out of his glabella before vanishing into the Taoist priest's head in a flash. Moments later, he released the Taoist priest, and his body collapsed to the ground again. So the entire Great Gene is currently in the midst of a major war. How interesting. It doesn't have anything to do with me this time, but it seems that the human world is in complete turmoil again. It's a pity that this man's only at the Foundation establishment stage and doesn't know a lot. I wonder how things are at the Heavenly South region, the blue-robed man murmured to himself as he rose to his feet in an unhurried manner. He had been possessed by Han Li's soul fragment, which had descended into the human world. The soul fragment was only imbued with peak nascent soul stage magic power, but that already granted him near invincibility in the human world. Han Li examined his own dirty robes, then raised a hand to touch his own face, and his brows furrowed slightly. All of a sudden, he made a hand seal, and a layer of azure light surged over his body, upon which he transformed into an ordinary-looking azure-robed young man. After that, he rose up into the air and flew away as a streak of azure light. Outside a certain giant city in the Great Jin, millions of soldiers were scaling up tall ladders with all their might, attempting to reach the top of the city wall. In response, the opposing soldiers on the city wall were retaliating with arrows and spears to keep the enemies at bay, and the entire battle was a massive bloodbath. There were also several hundred cultivators battling at an altitude of tens of thousands of feet, and on one side was a vast expanse of baleful qi, within which were countless ghostly shadows, while on the other side, several small formations had been set up, and all types of treasures were unleashing their powers. The most powerful beings among these cultivators was a pair of core formation cultivators, while the rest were mostly at the foundation establishment stage. As expected, these sects have played an important role behind the turmoil of the Great Jin. Regardless of who gets the last laugh, it looks like the imperial family of the Great Jin is about to be dethroned, Hanli sighed as he looked on from a white cloud in the sky. All of his experiences in the Great Jin were still as clear in mind as if they had taken place yesterday, but in reality, most of his acquaintances and even many of the sects that he was familiar with had most likely ceased to exist by now. This battle was naturally not of much interest to Hanli, and after lingering nearby for a short while longer, he made a hand seal and vanished on the spot. Within the restricted area in the southern region of the Great Jin, groups of cultivators wearing attire from a range of different sects were routinely patrolling a giant black mountain that extended all the way up into the clouds. An extremely powerful flight restriction had been set up here, so aside from the most powerful nascent soul stage beings in this realm, no one would be able to reach the mountain through an aerial route. Many years ago, this mountain had been the center of extensive conflict, and even many high-grade cultivators had perished on it. In the end, it had been sealed and was being guarded by several major sects, all the way until today. At this point, most of the treasures on the mountain were already gone, so no high-grade beings were interested in it anymore. As such, even though the mountain appeared to be extremely tightly guarded, all of the guards were simply going through the motions and not taking their duty seriously. All of a sudden, a faint shadow vanished into the black mountain in a flash, completely bypassing the restrictions and guards. Around an hour later, Hanli appeared over 1,000 feet above the summit of the mountain, and with his enormous spiritual sense, he was able to instantly inspect every single inch of the mountain despite the many restrictions in place. A complex look appeared on Hanli's face as he appraised this mountain that was both extremely familiar, but also completely alien to him. Seeing as Kunwa Mountain is no longer the place it once was, there's no need for it to continue to exist. Allow me to erase you from this realm, Hanli sighed as he rose up higher into the air as a streak of azure light. Moments later, a gargantuan azure hand that was over 10,000 feet in length appeared above the mountain amid a burst of spatial fluctuations, and the palm came crashing down amid an earth-shattering boom. Countless layers of restrictions were instantly activated, but they didn't even manage to slow down the giant azure hand in the slightest as it razed the mountain to the ground, leaving only an extremely deep massive crater in its place. The patrolling guards were all astonished to see this, and they couldn't help but wonder if they were in a dream. Shortly thereafter, some nascent soul cultivators who had been notified of the situation quickly arrived on the scene. However, after an investigation, they were unable to detect anything aside from some residual spiritual power in the area, so they could only depart with even more questions than they had come with. After that, this event became one of the 10 most incredible legends of the Great Jin, and it was discussed by countless cultivators over many years to come. However, as time passed, the tale began to die out, and after 10,000 years had passed, there were only some brief mentions of Kunwa Mountain that could be seen in some ancient tomes. At this moment, Heavenly Star City of the Scattered Star Seas was extremely lively and bustling, and countless boats of different sizes were converging toward it from all directions. Countless foundation establishment and core formation cultivators had gathered in the city, and occasionally, a nascent soul cultivator or two could be seen flying toward the top of the Star Palace. This day was the 2000th birthday of Patriarch Ling, the master of the Star Palace, and all of the powers in the entire scattered star seas had begun preparing presents over 10 years ago. This was all in an effort to appease Patriarch Ling so that the Star Palace would continue to protect them. At noon, several tens of nascent soul cultivators had gathered in the Star Palace, and all of them were appraising the woman on the main seat with respectful expressions. The woman wore a white palatial dress and had skin as fair as jade. She was extremely beautiful, and as she cast her gaze around the hall, all of the nascent soul cultivators whom her gaze fell upon immediately lowered their heads as a gesture of respect. As the only early deity transformation cultivator in the entire scattered star seas and the master of the Star Palace, this Patriarch Ling was deserving of such respect. One spirit fruits and tea had been brought to all of the nascent soul cultivators by some female servants. Patriarch Ling said, "It's about time, let's begin the ceremony." Someone immediately gave an affirmative response, yet just as the commencement of the ceremony was about to be officially announced, a male voice suddenly rang out outside the hall. "Hee, looks like I came at just the right time. Surely you have some wine to spare for an old friend, Fairy Ling." As soon as the voice trailed off, Hanli appeared outside the hall before making his way into the room with a faint smile. All of the nascent soul cultivators present immediately swept their spiritual sense toward him, only to find that he was giving off no spiritual power fluctuations whatsoever, as if he were a mere mortal. A hint of bewilderment appeared on Patriarch Ling's face upon hearing this voice, and upon seeing the owner of the voice, she immediately rose to her feet in an astonished manner as she said in a trembling voice, "How could this? How could you still be in this realm? I have some matters to attend to in this realm, so I had no choice but to come. I must congratulate you on reaching the deity transformation stage following my departure, Fairy Ling," Hanli replied with a faint smile. "Everyone, please vacate the hall. I wish to speak with this old friend in private," Ling Yuling suddenly instructed in a cold voice. All of the nascent soul cultivators in the hall had no idea what was going on, nor this new arrival was, but they didn't dare to object and could only take their leave. Thus, Hanli and Ling Yuling were soon the only ones left in the hall. Following everyone's departure, Ling Yuling immediately activated a restriction in the hall, then asked in an elated manner, "Fellow Daoist Han, did you descend from the spirit realm?" "I did. However, that's a long story that I can tell you about in detail later. It's been many years since I left the human world, so there are some things that I need to ask you about," Hanli replied in an unhurried manner. "Rest assured, Brother Han, I've rarely ventured out of the scattered star seas during these past years, but I know everything that's been happening in the human world like the back of my hand," Ling Yuling said as a complex look appeared on her face. "That's good to hear. I haven't met any of my past acquaintances aside from you during this trip, and all I want to know about is how my past acquaintances and the powers I was once associated with have been doing," Hanli said. After that, Hanli stayed in the hall with Ling Yuling for half a day before the restriction around the hall disintegrated, and a streak of azure light shot out. "I hope to see you again in the spirit realm someday, fellow Daoist Ling." After that parting sentence, Hanli vanished into the distant sky. Inside the hall, Ling Yuling was still seated on a chair, holding a jade slip in her hand with an excited expression. Meanwhile, Heavenly Star City was already tens of thousands of kilometers away, pondering what Ling Yuling had just told him. It turned out that the island that he had Nangongwan had left behind in the scattered star seas had become the base for a major power, led by his disciple, Tian Qiner, and several other juniors of theirs. Technically speaking, the members of that power were grand disciples of his. There was no lack of core formation and nascent soul cultivators among their ranks, including one of the nascent soul cultivators attending Ling Yuling's birthday ceremony. Ling Yuling had taken good care of them in Han Li's absence, and they were developing smoothly, so Hanli decided not to go and meet them. Tian China herself had failed to transcend her deity transformation stage tribulation many years ago and perished as a result. Thankfully, she had made some preparations beforehand, allowing her to preserve a part of her soul, so there was still a chance that she could be reincarnated. As for Shi Jian, the disciple of his who had inherited the teachings of the monarch of soul divergence, he had perished at the nascent soul during a battle against a powerful enemy. However, prior to his death, he had taken several disciples with great aptitude. As such, not only had the teachings of the monarch of soul divergence not gone into decline, it had experienced a resurgence of late. The Yellow Maple Valley and Drifting Clouds sect had diverged in completely different directions during these past years. At the time, the Yellow Maple Valley had been facing a major crisis, but since then, it had taken several extremely prodigious disciples, most of whom had become nascent soul cultivators. As a result, the Yellow Maple Valley had enjoyed a resurgence and was now a major sect in the Heavenly South region. In contrast, the Drifting Clouds sect had a massive foundation forged for it by Hanli, but its nascent soul elders had fallen one after another due to different circumstances. In the 1,000 years after that, no other nascent soul elder had emerged among its ranks, and it had now been reduced to a third-rate sect in the Dreamcloud mountain range. Even the major sects of old, such as the Ancient Sword sect and 100 Possibilities Pavilion, had mostly been replaced by newer sections. Hanli was struck by a sense of mixed emotions upon hearing about all of this, but there was nothing he could do aside from give a wry smile. Half a year later, Hanli was standing near a set of secluded ruins in the Unation of the Heavenly South region, appraising a dilapidated stone wall with a contemplative expression. The ruins had clearly been abandoned for a long time, and it was rife with unkempt weeds and shrubs, and the bricks were covered in thick layers of dark green moss. There was a small gray section left exposed on the stone wall ahead of Hanli, and a corner of a Han character could be seen engraved on the wall. After a while, the sound of footsteps suddenly rang out behind Hanli, and a couple rounded the corner with their son. The couple appeared to be around 30 years of age, and the man had dark skin with large hands and feet, while the woman had an air of simplistic beauty about her. Both of them were carrying baskets that were filled with things such as incense, and they appeared to be an average couple. The two of them faltered slightly at the sight of Hanli, while their son, who appeared to be 7 or 8 years of age, was also appraising Hanli with curiosity in his bright and adorable eyes. The man hesitated momentarily before making his way toward Hanli with his wife and son. Greetings, may I ask your name? Hanli had his back facing the man, but judging from his attire, the man could tell that Hanli was a well-educated individual, and that evoked a sense of respect within the man, who had rarely ever left the village. I am a member of the Han family, and I've come to visit the old Han family ancestral hall, Hanli replied as he turned around, and there was a very slight resemblance between him and the man. A hint of elation appeared on the man's face upon hearing this. I see, you must be from another branch of our Han family. I heard from my great-grandfather that our Han family was once a very prosperous family over 1,000 years ago, and there were many people coming back from different places to pay their respects at the ancestral hall, but that's become a rarer occurrence of late. As time passes by, the members of those branches of the Han family will gradually forget their roots, so it's no surprise that there are fewer and fewer of them returning to visit the ancestral hall. I have to give you credit for staying here, Hanli said with a hint of approval in his voice. I heard from great-grandfather that his generation had thought about leaving, but they couldn't bear to leave this place behind. Apparently, an ancestor of our Han family became a deity. If we were to leave, that deity wouldn't be able to find us if he ever returned someday, so we decided to stay, the man chuckled in response. A deity, eh? I've heard of that as well, but that legend was passed down from thousands of years ago, so it may not have much credibility, Hanli said. I'm not sure about that, but that's what all my seniors told me. Also, during a past ceremony, my great-grandfather once brought out a scabbard of a divine sword that was said to have been left behind by that deity ancestor of ours, so I'm sure there's some truth in that tale, the man said with a smile. A sword scabbard. Hanli raised an eyebrow upon hearing this. For some reason, the man felt Hanli's presence to be very comforting, and he said, "That's right. According to me seniors, the scabbard had always been worshipped in the ancestral hall, and many years ago, it saved our Han family from a major crisis. Unfortunately, after it was used that one time, the sword disintegrated into golden light, leaving only the scabbard behind. The scabbard doesn't appear to possess any special powers, but it's always been worshipped nonetheless. I heard that our Han family fell into rapid decline during a subsequent crisis as we no longer had the divine sword, and that forced its members to split up and leave." "I see. I don't know about all of that, but a family will inevitably experience peaks and troughs." "Is this your son? He looks like a very smart boy. What's his name?" Hanli asked in a nonchalant manner as he cast his gaze toward the little boy. The man was very pleased to hear Hanli praising his son, and he nudged his son forward as he said, This is my third eldest son, Han Ming. Minger, come here and greet your senior." The boy was very young, but he wasn't shy at all and immediately knelt down before kowtowing to Hanli twice as a greeting. Hanli had identified that the boy possessed a spiritual root, and even though it was only an ordinary one, it still evoked a sense of hope within Hanli. "Good boy. Seeing as we've met here, we must have some type of affinity. Here is a gift for your son. If he's fortunate, then perhaps this will be a major opportunity for him. Even if it doesn't work out that way, this will ensure that he lives a very long life." Immediately thereafter, he flipped a hand over to summon a jade badge, which he cast an incantation seal into before attaching a red string to it, then placed it around the boy's neck. The jade badge began to glow with white light, then suddenly vanished in a flash along with the red string. The boy's parents were astonished to see this, and by the time they looked up, Hanli was already nowhere to be seen. The boy's father was immediately rooted to the spot, while his wife yelled, "Was that a ghost?" During the next few days, word of the ghost encounter experienced by Han Heisi and his family spread through the neighboring villages, providing a good topic for gossip. Only after several months had passed by did everyone forget about this incident. However, several months after that, Han Ming unintentionally discovered the secret within the jade badge and suddenly left his home. Several years later, he was able to use the power of the badge to become a disciple to a nascent soul stage elder of the Drifting Clouds sect. From there, he went on to become a vastly renowned cultivator, and the Han family experienced another resurgence as a result. The outskirts of the Devilfall Valley was once a lively and bustling place, but as the supply of spirit medicines there dwindled, it had become a deserted place that no one was willing to venture into. However, on this day, an azure shadow ignored all of the residual restrictions within the valley and flew directly into it. Half a day later, an earth-shattering boom suddenly rang out within the Devilfall Valley, causing the nearby area to tremor violently. Immediately thereafter, a streak of azure light shot out before vanishing into the distance after just a few flashes. Such a massive commotion naturally alerted all of the nearby sects, and disciples were immediately sent to investigate. As a result, everyone was stunned to discover that a mountain that separated the inner and outer valley had disappeared, and there was only a gargantuan crater in its wake with wisps of silver light surging out of the ground. Great North Essence Light. Some of the more knowledgeable and experienced cultivators immediately identified this light, and many of them hurriedly entered the giant crater to try and collect some Great North Essence crystals. Unfortunately, even after scouring the crater hundreds of times, they could only find around a dozen of these crystals, and a significant conflict erupted between these cultivators as a result. The one who was responsible for all of this was naturally none other than Hanli. He had excavated the Great North Essence crystals under the Devilfall Valley, then arrived in a secluded cave nearby before setting up an extremely complex formation. There was no need for him to remain in the human world any longer, so he was preparing to return to the spirit realm. However, due to the fact that he had to return with the Great North Essence crystals, it was more difficult than when he had ascended, so he had no choice but to use a formation. Several hours later, the formation was finally complete. Hanli sat at the center of the formation and made a hand seal, upon which a giant 5-colored disc flew out of his body. The entire formation immediately began to buzz incessantly, and bursts of spiritual light swept out of it to inundate Hanli's entire body. Moments later, a rumbling boom rang out within the cave, and a thick pillar of white light erupted out of the heavens, only disappearing after it had reached an altitude of over 100,000 feet. At the same time, Hanli suddenly reverted back into the blue-robed man, who slumped onto the formation and fell completely still again. Within a secret chamber in the Azure Origin Palace, Hanli suddenly opened his eyes, and a yellow storage bracelet appeared on the futon in front of him without any warning. A pleased look appeared on Hanli's face upon seeing this storage bracelet. With these Great North Essence crystals, he would finally be able to complete the integrated 5 extreme mountains. That, in addition to the True Soul Pill, would give him a very good chance to transcend his ascension tribulation. Of course, as a safety precaution, he had to master the 3rd stage of the spirit refinement technique and also capitalize on his vast spirit Tao physique to master the organ refinement origin arts and other immortal cultivation arts. Once all that was done, he would be ready for his tribulation. With that in mind, a hint of irrepressible excitement welled up in Hanli's heart. 8,000 years was an unimaginably long period of time for a mortal, but for ancient true spirits who went into slumber for thousands of years at a time, it was nothing more than the blink of an eye. 8,000 years later, the human race had become a first-rate power on the Tianyuan continent. On this day, countless mortals had gathered on the street of all of the human cities, discussing something among themselves with excited expressions. There were also armed guards patrolling the streets, as well as groups of cultivators patrolling the sky. All of the cities on the outskirts of human territory had activated all of their restrictions, and massive flying treasures loaded with armored warriors had risen up into the air. It was as if the entire human race were preparing for war. On the summit of a massive mountain tens of thousands of kilometers away from the city, 3 foreign Grand Ascension stage beings were seated across from one another. One of them was a burly man in a 5-colored beast-hide garment who was gulping down mouthfuls of wine, and he was joined by a white-robed young man with a pale complexion, as well as a heavily wrinkled green-robed elderly man. After a long while, the burly man suddenly asked, "Heavenly Lord it's about time, isn't it? The best time to transcend an ascension tribulation would be at noon, when the yang energy is most abundant. This is the most powerful being in the spirit realm we're talking about here, so he's definitely aware of this. Just be patient and wait for a while longer," the green-robed elderly man replied as he opened his eyes. That's true. At such close proximity, there's no way we won't be alerted once the tribulation begins. It's been countless years since someone attempted an ascension tribulation. I'm getting a little excited just thinking about it, the burly man said with a smile. I can't recall when someone from the spirit realm last successfully transcended an ascension tribulation. I can only remember that it happened a very, very long time ago. I must say, this heavenly Zenith Han of the human race is very courageous for making no attempt to keep his tribulation transcendence a secret. In the past, everyone who's attempted such tribulations have always done so in secret in fear of being found out, the white-robed young man said with a hint of admiration in his voice. During these past years, many of our old acquaintances have disappeared. There must have been quite a few of them who had attempted tribulation transcendences in secret. Seeing as none of us detected those tribulation attempts, they must have all perished, the elderly man sighed. All of us are repressing our magic power with all our might in fear of attracting a heavenly tribulation too early, yet this heavenly Zenith Han is making a tribulation attempt after no more than 10,000 years as a grand ascension stage being. I also greatly admire his courage. By the way, fellow Daoist Bai, I heard that you encountered Heavenly Lord Han several thousand years ago. What kind of person is he? The burly man asked. I haven't had a chance to ever meet fellow Daoist Han, so I'm also quite interested to hear your answer, the white-robed young man chimed in with an intrigued expression. I did indeed meet fellow Daoist Han several thousand years ago, but I can't muster up the words to describe him, the elderly man replied with slightly furrowed brows after a brief hesitation. Then what were his powers like? Surely you were able to deduce that, the white-robed young man said. I can only say that he's extremely powerful. I didn't try to engage him in battle, but I'm sure that even 3 or 4 of me combined definitely wouldn't have been a match for him, the elderly man replied with a serious expression. What? Surely you jest, Heavenly Lord Bai. How could he possibly be able to defeat 3 or 4 of you at once? We've been acquaintances for a very long time, and we're extremely familiar with your powers, the white-robed young man exclaimed as he shook his head in disbelief. The burly man was also very skeptical to hear this. I wouldn't make jokes about something like this. If you two had gotten the chance to meet him, you would know why I'm making this assessment. Setting aside everything else, just a glance from him had struck me with a bone-chilling sensation. That's a clear indication that his spiritual sense is several times more powerful than my own, the elderly man replied with a wry smile. The white-robed young man and the burly man couldn't help but exchange a bewildered glance upon hearing this. In any case, this is good news. The more powerful fellow Daoist Han is, the greater the chance that he'll successfully transcend this tribulation. If that happens, energy fluctuations from the true immortal realm will emanate from the passageway that opens up the true immortal realm. All of the powerful beings in the entire realm should be able to sense this, and if we can attain enlightenment by immersing ourselves in those energy fluctuations, we'll be sure to benefit immensely. We're in very close proximity to fellow Daoist Han, so we should be able to sense those energy fluctuations more clearly, the burly man said as he returned to a calm expression. If that weren't the case, we wouldn't have gone to the trouble of coming all the way here, the white-robed young man chuckled in response. Thus, the 3 of them conversed for a while longer before falling silent again. Similar scenes were taking place in several other places outside the giant city. An astonishing number of Grand Ascension stage beings had gathered in the human territory, and many of them were old monsters who were constantly in seclusion and had to repress their magic power with all their might before they dared to come out. On the outskirts of a certain deserted island in the boundless sea, a man and a woman were standing next to one another. The woman was Fairy Ice Soul, and she was accompanied by a brocade-robed man with a remarkable disposition. There should be a very good chance that Brother Han succeeds in his tribulation transcendence. I'm sure we'll benefit immensely from witnessing such a spectacle at such close quarters, fellow Daoist Hu Jun, Fairy Ice Soul said. Indeed. If it weren't for the pills that had come out of the Azure Origin Palace, there's no way I would have been able to reach the Grand Ascension stage, and now, I'm once again benefiting from Heavenly Zenith Han, the man by the name of Hu Jun replied with a hint of admiration in his voice. He was a new Grand Ascension stage who had appeared in the human race during the past 1,000 years. As for Mo Jianli, he had perished during a major heavenly tribulation several hundred years ago. On the other side of the island were around a dozen cultivators standing in front of a giant black ark, among which was a trio of stunning beauties who were casting their eyes toward the center of the island with solemn expressions. These 3 were none other than Nangong Wan, Yuan Yao, and Silvermoon. Not long after Han Li's soul fragment returned from the human world, Yuan Yao and Yan Li had returned to the human race, where they moved into a side palace on the Origin Integration Island. As for Silvermoon, she had been freed from the curse of her art of indifference and reached the Grand Ascension stage over 1,000 years ago. Behind those 3 women were the Ice Phoenix and Han Li's direct disciples. During the past several thousand years, all of Han Li's disciples had reached the body integration stage. As for whether they would be able to reach the Grand Ascension stage, that was up to them. The Ice Phoenix, Nangong Wan, and Yuan Yao were all on the cusp of the Grand Ascension stage, and with her Ice Phoenix physique, the Ice Phoenix would presumably have a much better chance of reaching the Grand Ascension stage than the others. These were the people closest to Han Li, and they had immense confidence in him, but they still couldn't help but be concerned. High up in the sky close to 10,000 kilometers away, a black-robed young woman was standing on a black bird, looking in the direction of the deserted island with a complex expression. Beside her stood the Black Phoenix monarch, and she wore a sympathetic expression as she said, "Dire, if you really want to bid farewell to Senior Han, then why don't you go to see him? Don't make this a lasting regret that could affect your mental state. It's all right. Brother Han has always seen me as a little sister, and big sister Nangong and the others are already there, so there's no need for me to throw myself into the mix. I'll just watch his ascension from afar," Dia replied in a calm manner. The Black Phoenix monarch could only heave a faint sigh in response. At the center of a giant formation that had been set up at the center of the island, Han Li, Dao Xia, Mo Guang, and Huishuzi were gathered together, looking up into the sky. A five-colored cloud that encompassed virtually the entire island down below was slowly taking shape in the sky, and even though it was expanding at a very slow rate, the increase in its mass was still noticeable. "Looks like you'll have to transcend your ascension tribulation soon, fellow Daoist Han. With your powers, I'm sure you'll be able to transcend this tribulation with ease," Mo Guang said with a faint smile. "You think far too highly of me, brother Mo Guang. Countless Grand Ascension stage beings have perished at this hurdle. I certainly can't treat this tribulation lightly," Han Li replied. "Hee, that may apply to everyone else, but you've mastered the third stage of the spirit refinement technique and the organ refinement origin arts. Even the average immortal is most likely no match for you. If you were to encounter Ma Liang again in your current state, you'd be able to kill him with ease. I'm actually very intrigued. Your aptitude clearly isn't all that exceptional, but you've been able to cultivate these immortal abilities to a stunning extent. I must say, I've never seen anyone like you," Huishuzi mused. "Perhaps I'm naturally suited to cultivating these immortal techniques," Han Li replied with a smile. Dao Xia suddenly interjected, "Please don't forget the promise you made to me once you ascend to the true immortal realm, Master. You've recovered your memories and have accepted me as your master, so I'll be sure to follow through on my promise," Han Li replied with a serious expression. "Those were the wishes of my former master, and you'll only have a chance to fulfill them once you ascend," Dao Xia replied with a nod. Right at this moment, the five-colored cloud in the sky had become extremely enormous, and it was giving off an indescribably heavy aura. "Please stay back, fellow Taoists, I'm about to transcend my tribulation," Han Li said as he looked up into the sky through narrowed eyes. Mo Guang and the others naturally had no objection to this, and they immediately flew away from Han Li. At the same time, Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to release Jin Tong, who also flew away in a flash. After that, he sat down with a calm expression. Soon, Mo Guang and the others had appeared on the other side of the island, where they drew to a halt before turning back to face the center of the island from afar. All of a sudden, a burst of loud rumbling rang out, and a giant black hole appeared within the five-colored cloud, following which a gust of gray wind swept forth. Initially, the gust of wind was quite unremarkable, but as soon as it left the black hole, it descended from above as a sea of fierce wind. "That's heavenly astral wind. It looks like the ascension tribulation is about to arrive," Huishuzi said with a faint smile. "This heavenly astral wind is quite formidable, but fellow Daoist Han has already prepared countermeasures against it, so he has nothing to fear," Mo Guang replied in an unhurried manner. As soon as his voice trailed off, an azure lotus flower bloomed at the center of the island. Initially, it was only around the size of a house, but it soon swelled to several acres in size before releasing countless streaks of azure sword chi that sliced through the nearby space. Lethal heavenly astral winds descended from above, but the azure lotus flower remained completely resolute, shielding Hanli within it. The storm of heavenly astral wind lasted several hours, and if a normal Grand Ascension stage cultivator were in Hanli's place, this storm alone would have whittled away most of their magic power, making it impossible for them to transcend the rest of the tribulation. However, to Hanli, this was barely a warm-up. All of a sudden, the fierce winds gushing out of the black hole finally ceased, but it was immediately replaced by a scorching heatwave. Immediately thereafter, countless palm-sized crimson runes appeared around the edge of the black hole, and there were golden patterns flashing on each of the runes. A string of dull thumps rang out as these runes quickly exploded into balls of crimson light, then came crashing down from above as a storm of lava, staining the entire sky a crimson color in the process. The deserted island was extremely massive, and those on the outskirts of the island were situated very far away from Hanli, but they could still sense the scorching heatwaves surging toward them from the distance, prompting them to release protective treasures to defend themselves. The Ink Spirit Holy Ark also shuddered before releasing a black light barrier to protect everyone on the Ark. A hint of concern flashed through the eyes of Nan Gongwan and the others upon seeing this. They were already struggling to withstand the heat waves from so far away. The conditions had to be over 100 times worse for Hanli. What was even more worrisome to them was that the heavenly tribulation had only just begun. All of a sudden, a giant silver bird flew out of the massive lotus flower. Initially, the bird was only several tens of feet in size, but it was able to completely disregard the storm of lava as all of its feathers took on a faint golden hue. At the same time, it swelled to over 10,000 feet in size while releasing a burst of glacial power, transforming the entire area within a radius of thousands of kilometers into a world of glacial ice. 3 days and 3 nights later, tribulations of all types of descriptions rained down from the heavens, but Hanli was able to nullify them with ease. At this point, the entire island had already been destroyed, and there was only a light formation that was supporting the azure lotus flowers from below. The nearby surface of the sea had also dropped by several tens of feet, and one half was completely frozen, while the other was a world of scorching lava. Aside from Ice Soul, Silvermoon, and several other Grand Ascension stage beings, everyone else had retreated further away. Once the black hole in the sky disappeared, balls of purple lightning began to appear within the 5-colored cloud, and the fearsome lightning tribulation finally arrived. However, Hanli was already prepared for this, and he raised a hand up into the air, upon which a small gray mountain appeared above the azure lotus flower before instantly swelling to over 100,000 feet tall. A series of gray halos then proliferated out of the mountain in all directions, and with each halo that the purplish golden lightning flashed through, the power of the lightning would be slightly diminished. These halos were imbued with some type of power of law that specifically repressed the power of heavenly lightning. Some of the bolts of purplish golden lightning didn't even make it to Hanli before the halos wiped them out of existence. However, the remaining bolts of lightning were able to pass directly through the giant gray mountain as if it were nothing more than an illusion. A burst of piercing blue light flashed within Hanli's eyes upon seeing this, and he immediately rose to his feet. An almighty devilish projection with 3 heads and 6 arms then appeared within the azure lotus flower before making a grabbing motion to summon a massive dark green sword. However, the projection paid no heed to the sword as a dense golden light barrier above it, and it clenched its 6 hands into tight fists before lashing out toward the heavens. A string of earth-shattering explosions rang out as a giant golden vortex appeared above the devilish projection before releasing a burst of fearsome power. The oncoming bolts of purplish golden lightning were impacted by this power, and most of it was drawn into the vortex in a flash. The little lightning that remained struck the golden light barrier above the devilish projection, causing it to tremor violently, but were unable to break through. This was the immortal secret technique, Origin Astral Barrier, that Hanli had cultivated. The purplish-golden lightning fell continuously for over an hour before subsiding, but a series of purplish-golden dragon projections then appeared in the sky. They opened their mouths in unison, and house-sized balls of lightning came crashing down from the heavens. A resounding boom rang out as the light barrier above the devilish projection finally disintegrated along with the dozen or so purplish-golden lightning dragons. The five-colored cloud up above then parted while the thunderclap subsided, and a giant expressionless face that had appeared in the sky also began to blur. A burst of piercing purple light flashed behind the giant face, and a long white rift was slowly opened up. This is the gate to the true immortal realm. At this point, Hanli had already expended most of his magic power, but he was ecstatic as he reverted back to his human form. He looked up at the white rift with irrepressible excitement in his eyes, and right at this moment, the giant face that had almost completely faded suddenly opened its mouth again. A loud thunderclap rang out, and a bolt of rainbow lightning came crashing down from above, piercing through the giant lotus flower and reaching Hanli in a flash. Hanli was given a massive fright by this, and he hurriedly rubbed his hands together before raising them to release a burst of golden lightning. Immediately thereafter, he slashed his dark green wooden sword through the air to unleash a green sword projection. A thunderous boom rang out across the entire sky, and a burst of scintillating light that lit up virtually the entire sea appeared above Hanli before quickly being destroyed by bursts of law fluctuations. Hanli stumbled out into the open, and his face had turned extremely pale. His entire body was charred black, and the wooden sword in his hand had snapped in half. Hanli glanced down at what remained of his wooden sword, then looked up at the giant face in the sky, and upon discovering that it had actually disappeared on this occasion, he finally heaved a long sigh of relief. A black light formation appeared beside him amid a burst of spatial fluctuations, and Mo Guang, Washuzi, Daoist Xia, and Jin Tong appeared at once. He, congratulations on transcending your tribulation, Brother Han, you'll be able to ascend to the true immortal realm soon. Indeed, I've finally transcended my ascension tribulation and am about to become an immortal, Hanli murmured in a trance-like state. A faint smile appeared on Mo Guang's face, and he was just about to say something further when dazzling light erupted out of the white rift in the sky, following which a white pillar of light descended to instantly envelop Hanli and the others. The pillar of light began to revolve, and countless golden runes surged forth in a frenzy. At the same time, a burst of suffocating law fluctuations from the true immortal realm proliferated outward in all directions, instantly sweeping through every corner of the entire spirit realm. All of the Grand Ascension stage beings were ecstatic to sense these fluctuations, and they immediately closed their eyes to immerse themselves within it. Mo Guang and Huashuzi also exchanged an ecstatic glance upon seeing this, and the former vanished into Hanli's body as a burst of black qi, while the latter flew up Hanli's sleeve as a crimson fireball. Daoist Xia and Jin Tong were an immortal puppet and a spirit beast of Hanli's respectively, so they naturally didn't have to fear this pillar of light, and they also disappeared into a spirit beast bracelet on Hanli's wrist. At this moment, around a dozen streaks of light appeared in the distant sky before approaching Hanli as quickly as they could, but it was already too late. Hanli only caught a brief glimpse of Nangong Wan's urgent expression within one of the streaks of light before his body became completely weightless, and countless golden runes surrounded him, carrying him up toward the white rift along the pillar of light. In the instant that he entered the rift, Hanli's entire body stiffened, and he immediately fell unconscious. After an indeterminate period of time, Hanli opened his eye as a cool sensation flowed through his entire body, and he was greeted by an unfamiliar handsome young man, who smiled to reveal a set of pristine white teeth as he said, "I am Gao Sheng, and I welcome you to the Northern Glacial Immortal Region. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."